The town of Harlan's Crossing sat low between two dry ridges, like something the land had tried to swallow. The buildings faced each other across a single main street, gray with old wood and old dust. Most towns had a smell to them. Harlan's Crossing smelled like nothing at all, like a place that had stopped expecting things to change. He rode in from the north just after dawn, the man on the gray horse. He didn't hurry. He never hurried. Scout moved at the pace his rider set, and that pace was one that let a man see everything worth seeing before anyone noticed he was looking. The gallows were already built. That was the first thing. Not the church, not the saloon, not the general store, the gallows. Standing at the far end of the street like it had always been there, like the town had planned around it. Fresh timber, new rope, still twisted with its own tension. The platform was raised about 4 feet off the ground. A man standing on it could see the whole street. Everyone on the street could see him. He rode past it without turning his head. There were people already gathered, even at this hour. Not the excited kind of gathered, the quiet kind. The kind that stands at a distance and watches because the town expects them to. A woman near the dry goods store held a child by the wrist, not the hand. An old man sat on a crate outside the barber shop with his hat off, turning it in his hands. 2 men stood near the entrance to the livery, talking low, stopping when they saw the stranger ride past. He tied Scout to the rail outside the saloon. The door was open. He went in. The barman was a thin man with a red face and the kind of eyes that see profit in every situation. He set a glass on the bar before the stranger reached it. That was telling. A man who was afraid would have waited to be asked. A man who was completely at ease would have asked what was wanted. A man who put the glass down early was a man trying too hard. The stranger ordered coffee. The barman took the glass back without a word. There were 4 other men in the saloon. One asleep in a chair near the window, boots crossed, hat over his face. 2 playing cards at a corner table, though they hadn't looked at their cards in a while. And 1 man at the far end of the bar, nursing a glass of something amber, staring at nothing. The card players were watching the stranger without appearing to. He drank his coffee slow. It was bad coffee, the kind made from grounds used twice. He drank it anyway and listened to the town outside. The barman cleaned the same section of bar 3 times without looking at it. The stranger put a coin down and asked, quiet, "Who's hanging today?" The barman looked at the coin, then at the door, then at the stranger. He said a boy, name of Elias Cole. Said he killed Garrett Phelps, one of the Phelps brothers. Found him dead in his own barn 2 weeks back. Said the jury took less than an hour. The barman said all of this the way a man recites something he was told to believe, rather than something he believed. The stranger asked how old. 17, the barman said. Then he picked up the coin and went to the other end of the bar. The stranger finished his coffee and went back outside. The crowd had grown some, maybe 40 people now, fanned out around the gallows in a loose half-circle that left a clear path from the jailhouse at the near end of the street to the platform at the far end. That path was the only thing anyone was thinking about. Everyone standing there, every single one of them, was watching that path. He walked the opposite direction. The jailhouse was a low adobe building with iron bars on the one window that faced the street. He stopped at that window. Inside was a boy sitting on a wood bench against the far wall. 17 might have been generous. He was slight, fair-haired, with hands too big for his frame the way boys get before they finish growing. He was looking at the floor. Not praying, not crying, just looking at the floor. The stranger stood at the window a moment. The boy looked up. His eyes were red at the edges but dry. They were clear eyes, not stupid eyes, not guilty eyes. The boy said nothing. The stranger said nothing. He moved on. The Phelps family had a house on the south end of town, bigger than the rest, the kind of house that announced itself. He didn't go to it. He walked instead to the far side of the livery, where a man was forking hay alone in the dark of the stable. The man was old enough to have stopped pretending things were better than they were. The stranger asked about Garrett Phelps, not about the murder, about the man. The old man forked hay for a while before he answered. Said Garrett was the middle brother. Said the oldest, Cutter Phelps, ran things now. Ran the mill, ran 2 of the 3 cattle operations north of town, sat on the county commission. Said Garrett had a temper, had debts. The boy, Elias Cole, had been working the Phelps ranch part-time. Said there'd been a dispute about wages. The old man said it plainly, like a man laying out facts he'd been sitting with for 2 weeks. The stranger asked who found the body. The old man stopped forking. He looked at the hay. He said Cutter Phelps found it. The stranger asked if that struck the old man as strange. The old man said it struck him as exactly what it was and went back to forking. He walked back toward the main street. The sun was higher now. The crowd was denser. At the far end, near the gallows steps, a man in a black coat was speaking to 2 other men. Tall man, pale. He stood the way men stand when they're accustomed to rooms arranging themselves around them. That was the judge. The stranger had seen enough judges to know one without introduction. Standing beside the judge was a broader man, not tall but wide, with short gray hair and a face that had settled into a permanent squint. He wore a good coat for a town this size. He was watching the jailhouse. He was watching it the way a man watches something he has already decided the outcome of. That was Cutter Phelps. The stranger moved through the crowd without touching anyone. He noted the deputy standing near the gallows steps. Young, rigid, the kind of young that wanted badly to appear certain. He noted the two men flanking the jailhouse door. Ranch hands by the look of them. Phelps men. He noted the reverend standing off to one side, holding his Bible in both hands without opening it. Nobody looked comfortable. That was the thing. In the crowds he'd seen at genuine hangings, when a town had a real killer and knew it, there was a particular quality to the gathering. A grim satisfaction. The weight of justice settling. This crowd had none of that. This crowd had the quality of people who had been told what to believe and were working hard at believing it. A woman near him muttered to another woman, said she'd known the Cole family since Elias was born, said his father worked honest, said the boy had no reason. The second woman said nothing. She stared ahead and said nothing. The jailhouse door opened. Two deputies came out first, then the boy between them. Elias Cole walked with his hands bound in front of him. He walked slow, not dragging his feet, just slow. The crowd went quiet in a way that wasn't respectful. It was the quiet of discomfort, of a town that couldn't look directly at what it was doing. The boy looked at the faces as he walked. He wasn't looking for help. He'd stopped expecting help. He was just looking, the way a person looks at the last things. The stranger moved to the edge of the path and watched him pass. The boy's eyes moved through the crowd and stopped when they reached him. Not because the stranger did anything, not because he said anything. They stopped because the stranger was the only person in that crowd who met them directly, without flinching, without looking away. They held that for 2 seconds. Then the deputies moved the boy forward and the crowd closed in behind. The stranger stood where he was. He looked at Cutter Phelps. Phelps was watching the boy climb the gallows steps. His face had not changed, not tight with grief, not flushed with triumph. Flat. The face of a man watching something go according to plan. The stranger moved closer to the gallows. The judge read from a piece of paper. He read it the way men read things they didn't write themselves, without inflection, without weight. The words were about justice and the verdict of peers and the law of the territory. The words meant nothing. The crowd knew it. The judge knew it. Elias Cole stood on the platform with the rope around his neck and looked at the sky. Not at the crowd, not at Phelps, at the sky. Like he was saying goodbye to the only thing in Harlan's Crossing that hadn't lied to him. The judge folded the paper. He looked at the boy with the practiced gravity of a man who had learned to perform gravity because he'd lost the real kind. He asked, "Any last words?" The boy lowered his eyes from the sky. He looked at the crowd below. His voice was level. It did not shake. He said, "I didn't do it." He said it the way a man states a fact, not the way a man begs. He said, "I didn't kill Garrett Phelps. I never hurt anybody." Then he stopped. 3 sentences. That was all. The crowd was still. Cutter Phelps had not moved. The judge gave the nod to the deputy at the lever. The stranger was already moving. He didn't run. He moved through the crowd with purpose, direct, continuous, no wasted motion. The people near him stepped aside without knowing why. He reached the base of the gallows and went up the steps in 3 strides. The deputy reached for his arm. The stranger put the deputy aside with one hand, not roughly, just firmly, the way you move something that is in the wrong place. He reached the boy before the lever dropped. He had a knife on his belt, short blade, heavy, made for work rather than show. He pulled it and cut the rope above the boy's head with one draw. The rope was new and resistant. He cut it anyway. The noose went slack. The boy staggered but didn't fall. The stranger caught him by the shoulder and held him upright. The crowd erupted, not in anger, not in support, in confusion. The particular chaos of a group of people whose script has just stopped making sense. Voices overlapped. Someone shouted. The deputy at the lever stood with his hand still on it, looking at the platform with an expression of complete blankness. Cutter Phelps pushed forward through the crowd. His face was no longer flat. Something had broken through it. Not grief, not shock. Fury. The calculated kind. The kind that fears exposure. He pointed at the platform and said this was illegal. Said this was unlawful interference. Said the man would hang for this. The stranger stood at the edge of the platform with the boy behind him. He looked at Phelps. Just looked. He didn't speak. There was something in that look that made Phelps stop walking, made him stop pointing, made the men around Phelps take one step back without appearing to. The judge called for order. His voice cracked on the second word. The stranger said one thing. He said it loud enough for the crowd to hear. He said, "Ask Cutter Phelps where he was the night his brother died." The crowd went quieter than before, because a man in the front, an older man, weathered, with the look of someone who had been carrying something heavy, spoke up then. He said he'd been meaning to say something. Said he'd seen Cutter Phelps riding toward his own barn at dusk that evening. Said the barn where Garrett's body was found. Said he'd thought nothing of it at the time because who would? Said he thought something of it now. Phelps turned to the man. His expression said everything. Another voice, a woman this time, said Garrett had told her 2 days before he died that he and his brother had fought. About money, about a debt Cutter owed him. Said Garrett was thinking about leaving the family operation. Said Cutter had threatened him. The crowd was no longer looking at the gallows. They were looking at Cutter Phelps. Phelps turned to the deputies. He said to arrest the stranger. His voice had lost its certainty. Not much, but enough. The way ice loses its hold before it breaks. The deputies looked at the crowd. The crowd looked at the deputies. The deputies did not move. The judge had gone pale. The stranger came down the gallows steps. The boy followed him, still with his hands bound, the cut rope trailing from his wrists. The stranger produced his knife again and cut the binding in 2 pulls. The boy stood there rubbing his wrists and looking at the crowd around him, blinking, like a man emerging from something dark. Someone in the crowd moved toward Phelps, then another, not violently, not yet, but with purpose. With the specific movement of a group that has been holding something back and has just been given permission to stop. Phelps looked at his ranch hands. They were backing away. The stranger walked past all of it, past Phelps, past the judge, past the crowd reforming itself around a new center. He walked to where Scout was tied at the saloon rail. He untied the reins. He mounted with the ease of a man who has done it 10,000 times and would do it 10,000 more. He did not look back at the gallows. He did not look back at the boy. He turned Scout north and rode. Behind him, the town of Harlan's Crossing was finding its voice. It was loud now, the particular loud of a crowd that has finally remembered what it knew all along and is angry that it took so long to say it. The judge was speaking, and then not speaking. The sheriff had emerged from somewhere, moving toward Phelps with a look that said this had just become a different kind of day. The stranger heard none of it. The high plains opened ahead of him, flat and gray-green under the morning sun, running all the way to the next ridge without interruption. The wind came out of the west, dry and straight. Scout moved at a walk, then picked up his pace without being asked. There are men who ride through a country and leave it changed. They don't announce themselves. They don't explain. They read what a place has forgotten how to see, and they act, and then they move on before the place decides how to feel about it. This was that kind of man. He had no name that the town of Harlan's Crossing would ever know. He had no destination that any of them could follow. He had only the next ridge, and the one beyond that, and the one beyond that. Behind him, a boy was standing in the middle of a street with the cut rope still at his feet, watching the gray horse disappear into the distance. The boy did not call out. He understood, the way some people understand things before they have words for them, that calling out would miss the point entirely. He just stood there and watched the man go. There are stories that get told around fires years later, about a stranger who came into Harlan's Crossing on a gray horse, who walked through a hanging and walked out again, who said 4 words and let the town do the rest. The stories change with the telling. Some say he shot the rope. Some say he fought his way through deputies to do it. Some say he had a badge, or once had one, or had refused one. None of that is true, but stories need handles, and the truth doesn't always provide them. What happened was simpler and harder than any of the versions. A man rode in. A man read the room. A man made a choice that everyone else in that crowd had the capacity to make and hadn't, and then he rode out. Cutter Phelps was taken in by the territorial sheriff 3 days later. A ranch hand, offered leniency, testified to what he'd seen. It took 2 more weeks for the full picture to emerge. The debt, the confrontation, the rock pulled from the wall of the barn in the dark. The trial took longer than an hour. The verdict was different from the first one. Elias Cole went home to his father's house. He didn't talk much about what happened, not even to people who asked directly. When they pressed him, he would say only that a man came through. When they asked what man, he would say, "A man on a gray horse." When they asked his name, the boy would be quiet for a moment and then say, "He didn't give one." That was accurate. It was also all there was to say. The high plains are wide, and they do not hold on to things. The wind moves across them without memory. Towns come and go. Some hold on. Some dry up and blow apart. Some simply stop being what they thought they were and become something else, or nothing. Harlan's Crossing became something else. Not all at once, and not without argument. But it became a place that had, at least once, looked at what it was doing and changed course. That is more than most places manage. The stranger had no knowledge of any of this. He was north of the ridge before Phelps was in custody. He was a county away by the time the second trial concluded. He did not think about the boy with the clear eyes. He did not think about the new rope and the clean timber and the weight that platform had been built to hold. He thought about the next town, the way it would sit in its valley or on its flats, the way he would read it as he rode in, who was standing where, who was watching, who wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. He thought about coffee, probably bad. He thought about Scout's left front shoe, which had been set slightly loose for 2 days and would need a farrier soon. He did not think of himself as a good man. He did not think of himself as anything in particular. He was a man who knew how to read a room. He was a man who could not ride past something broken without slowing down. He was a man who had learned, the way certain things are learned, not from books but from consequence, that the cost of doing something is often high, and the cost of doing nothing is always higher. The plains stretched out ahead, pale gold, enormous, patient. Scout moved at an easy canter. The wind pushed from the west. The man on the gray horse rode north, into the part of the country where no one knew his face, and no one knew what he'd done the morning before, and no one would think to look. That was how he lived. That was how he'd always lived. That was all there was to it. If you want to see more stories about men like this, men who ride into broken places and do what needs to be done and ride out before the gratitude arrives, hit subscribe. There are more of these. There always are.